experience in building houses originally before your fitness days, what does rebuilding your house mean material wise to be fireproof?
Yeah, that's a big part. That's a big one, Ross. Um, we got two things we're dealing with. One is the Australian building standards have a pretty broad outline of what I have to build the house to. And my house has to be built to a blaze attack level, they call it. And it's an acronym BAL, BAL, and it's your property is calculated by a fire engineer of having a certain level of blaze attack, meaning fire attack, and where our property lies, and it's all about where it lies in the community, where it lies in the street, the steepness, within 10 metres of either grassland or bush or dense forest, all those. It's a very complex equation that spits out what your particular house has to be built to, and it displays attack level of resistance. Ours is BAL flame zone. Now, what the Australian standard at currently, and because it's continually evolving, is they've taken a standard timber house and they layer it with materials that slow down the burning effect on virtually the timber frames, anything in there. And then that's all well and good. But one of the most important things about building houses in bushfire areas is the ember attack. And embers are the very fine pieces of timber that float around, and they can travel 3, 5, and 10 kilometres in a firestorm. In a rolling firestorm, you get these giant balls of embers that roll along, and they smother the house and get into every single crack and nook and cranny in the house. Now, the more important than burning the house down with materials is keeping those embers out. That in itself is a major task in making a house less than 2 millimetre aperture to let embers in. You look at the standard house, there's gaps everywhere. And because of this, building your house to such a resilient level, it achieves two things. One, it stops your house from burning down, and two, it creates a very thermally efficient house. So from a heating and cooling point of view, it's very, very good. So back to my original start, and I've got to be careful I run off a bit at the side, but at the moment, the Australian Building Standards is all around protecting and putting layers of protection and ember attack on timber-framed houses. And that means you've got a big job, because most of the frames in people's houses these days are pine, and pine burns extremely. It's very volatile. It's very easy to set fire, whereas old hardwood frame houses, they could resist. They can take a lot more heat before they ignite. Now, I had in my building industry, or the building career I had before I got involved in the fitness industry where you and I met, is I got tied up with steel framed houses. And I'm originally a fitter and a tool maker, and I'm very mechanically and very all about steel. And I got involved, and I love houses, I love architecture. So the overlap of steel framed housing back in the early 90s was a real I was very excited about. Always said I'd build a steel framed house, burning. And when I stood there for 3 months looking at my burnt out house sitting there, the three things that stayed, all crumbled up and all survived the fire, was the bricks, the concrete, and the steel. And every time I walk past it, I go, I think that's what I've got to build the house out of, those three materials. So that's what I've done. I've built this steel house with aerated concrete floors and concrete foundations, and there's not a stick of timber anywhere in the joint. And that's me being very anal and also very detailed. And I love steel. I'm very good with steel because it's incredibly straight, it's incredibly light, it's incredibly strong. And I know I can hear people now saying, oh, yeah, but steel houses burn down. Steel houses burn down because fires get inside the house. And my house will burn down if a fire starts inside the house. If someone's, a radiator or someone smoking inside the house, and Mrs. Webby walks, decides to do a sneaky cigarette sitting on the lounge and falls asleep because she's been into the whiskey as well, the house will burn down and all the steel frames will melt. You can't, concrete houses will burn down if a fire gets inside it, because it's all your materials, your timbers, your joinery, your clothes, your lounges and everything that will make a house burn from the inside. So what you try and do is you stop the fire coming into the house. So
is that not, given the area you're in and the blaze attack level, is that not a requirement to use all those materials to make it fireproof, fire retardant, the best way possible?
No, the current building standard gives you the option to still build a timber house, because the majority of builders love building in timber houses. And I understand it. They've got nail guns and they've got drop saws and they've got planers and they've got, they've got everything that you need to build timber frame construction. Building steel frame construction, you've got to step outside the circle. You've got to think of it differently.
Yeah.
And the young builder that's helping me, Jason Colebrook from Knock It Up Constructions, he and his apprentice have just putting down the steel floor system, putting the frames, and it's so true and it's so straight, and it's so, the floors are so incredibly level. Like, we had a storm go through, and because I don't have any windows in the house yet, all the aerated concrete floors got covered in water. It just is dead flat. The water sits there and doesn't flow off or get heavy in any areas. It's just a sheen of water over all the aerated concrete floor, because my steel bearers and joists are all so straight and true. That, in a sense, because of that concept, I'm using steel frames. I'm using steel bearers and joists. I've used Spantec for all my bearers and joists, and Spantec for all my roof framing, and all my frames, my wall frames are all by True Blue Steel. And these companies have been incredibly supportive and have been wonderful in educating me and working with me, because it's such a different build. It's not a normal standard build. And it was a challenge to them as well to do what I wanted to have done, because I wanted to still keep the old looking house, but I wanted all the new components in it. And then it was my choice. The Australian Building Standard says that you can still put a timber chipboard floor right through the house, but for a bell flame zone, the outside perimeter of the floor, the first 900 mils from the outside frames, has to be a non-combustible material. And we have sheeting that's totally fibre cement, and it doesn't, it's non-combustible. But you can still use chipboard floors everywhere else. I decided to go for the aerated concrete because it's 75 millimetres thick. It gives me a lovely thermal bank. When the sun comes in, it heats up the floor and it gives me a thermal bank. So I've got this lovely 75 millimetre lightweight concrete panels that we laid, screwed and glued on all the steel bearers and joists. And then I got my steel frames, and then the Australian standard says that you can put a layer of fire check or fire resistant plasterboard right around the outside of the house, because that's like an outside perimeter to stop flames and heat getting to your internal frames. Because I'm using steel, I decided to use a product called TBA Firefly, which is like a beautiful 10 millimetre blanket that's pliable and soft, and I've wrapped the whole house in this blanket that is totally non-combustible. Then I'm using another Then I'm using battens on that TBA Firefly, a steel batten, and then I'm putting a sarking on it, which is every house has to have a sarking. Our sarking and the sarking I'm using is totally non-combustible. The Australian standard sarking that you get from all the major hardware suppliers is combustible. It's fossil fuel based, and it's just that thin. And then the outside cladding I'm using is a steel sheeting, a Colorbond steel sheet, and that's where Bluescape Steel, and I'm using all their products. So it's the heart and soul of the house is incredibly resilient. And then I'm doing other features as well to make it a totally different build. We need water tanks. I'm putting water tanks. I built a tank room under the house. But water tanks aren't on the outside. I'm using great big commercial gutters, and I'm not having stop ends. You know, when you see a gutter around a house and they put a stop end on the gutter, I'm not having stop ends on my gutters so that I can clean my gutters out, and the water, when it, I'm just doing so many different things that people don't understand it. And then don't start me on the inside. The inside's totally different as well. And it's, who was it, Einstein, that said, keep doing the same thing a million times and expect a different outcome? Well, I'm trying to do it differently and expect a different outcome, and hopefully I will. So it's a totally different build to what anyone else is doing in the area.
What's been your biggest challenge then?
The biggest challenge with it is really being me understanding that, because I'm not doing the standard stuff, understanding where I have to bring those materials in and how I have to use them. And also a lot of those materials still have to be done and have to be installed via the testing procedure that gave them the rating of Bell Flame Zone floor, or Bell Flame Zone cladding, or Bell Flame Zone shutters. We've got to put shutters right around every single window, a motorised shutter, big stainless steel shutter. And on our little house, there's $90,000 worth of shutters got to be put on as a final tick. And all those shutters have been tested in laboratories and build up walls and so forth, and understanding, and it's all got to be signed off and got to be done properly. And it's
so the house, every stage is inspected, signed off to prove that you're the Bell Flame you're going to be.
Yes, that's right. And all these, and I have to have all the certifications for it. I have to have any installations done by a supplier. I can't put my own Bell Flame Zone shutters on, because the manufacturer, and he has to install them, and he has to sign off on them that they've been installed to the standards that they were tested to, and that all the bases have been covered. And that's probably the biggest task, is getting the certification on the property. And I'm suddenly realizing that all this stuff and all this education that I've done on sourcing these materials, and physically putting a lot of these materials on, I've got more experience and understanding than what even the certifiers have, because they have never physically put it on. They've read textbooks, they've seen reports, but when you got to wrap a corner and a roof and a eave intersection with a fire resistant cladding, and everyone has different degrees in their roofs, 5 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees. No situation is the same. So, and I'm very pedantic, and I'm making sure, as much as all the regulatory bodies want me to do it properly, Greg Webb wants it done properly, because I never want this house to burn down again. I'm so particular about how this is going on. A couple of the suppliers have said to me, man, you are going to the nth degree in installing it. My God, they said it's just, and it's turning into a working case. It's turning into an education project. Suppliers want to video it and talk about it and hear me talk about it, and it's a work in progress. I suggest things now to suppliers, how I think their product can be better used and utilised, because I love feedback. I love, it's no good having a meal at a restaurant and walking out going, that meal wasn't very good. You've got to be the guy who goes up and says, please don't take this the wrong way, but your meal was blah, 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 blah. And that's what we need. We need that. We need that positive reinforcement or education in it. So it's
4 years ago, could you have imagined this journey and what it was going to lead to?
Never did I think. And I can hear myself, arms folded with Mel James and live and say, oh, Mel, and in 18 months we'll be in the house and it'll all be done, blah, blah, blah. Man. I've got my reversing sirens on, so they're so loud when I backing up, going whoa, whoa, whoa. But and then, and it's interesting. It's really a different build, and I'm quite proud of the fact it is now, and it's really hard for people to understand why it's taken so long when we're in a life of project homes and kit homes and builders knocking stuff up and all the painted materials and all the gap fillers and all the, bang, 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 get a house built. We can get this, 3,000 square metre house built in 8 months, and we'll get it built for you, bang, 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 at no cost. And, I'm all about function over form. As Ray Gianelli used to say, Rossa, it's all about function over form, isn't it? And that's where I gained that quote from. I use it all the time. It's got to be functional before it's actually pretty, and sometimes I think I'm like that. Old and crinkly,
if Mel called you next week to get an update and say, well, you told us you'd be there, you'd invite us here in 2 years, you're back in the house 4 years on, what would you say to Mel about not what you've learned, of how you've coped with the whole experience or underestimated the whole experience?
I'd just say, well, I got that wrong, didn't I, Mel?
Hey, to err is human. It's only human to err. I mean, that's normal.
But very human, very human. But the thing that I'm so glad that it's taken me this long, because it has given me such an experience, such an education, and it's a career that I'm going to forge forward and make a mark on the industry and assist and help people moving forward. The fact that it's been such a journey for me, and I don't expect anyone to build a house like I'm building it, but a lot of the parts of our house can be taken on board, utilised across the board of building and educating people and understanding. It's not a scary process. It doesn't have to be scary, because you've got people like me now who know about it and can advise and go, you should look at this, you should look at that, and don't maybe get rid of that roof design because it's got a pinch point in the roof that'll just collect embers. Get rid of fancy roofs, flat skillion, very simple roofs in our environment. I'm not saying all houses, in our environment, So
have you met anybody else who's done? Have you met anybody else who's built the same way you have?
No, and it was very interesting that one of the chaps who was employed for 3 years by St Vincent de Paul to look after recovery in the area came and saw me on his last day, and he said to me, Webby, you are the only one of the 105 houses that have been built. You're the only one that's putting all this time and effort into it, And once Russell, you've seen the block. Once you see it and see where we're living and the beauty of it, it's worth every cent. I owe it to her. I owe it to the old girl to rise out of the ashes and make it glorious. And she was at such an inconspicuous little house, and now everybody's talking about it. These giant slanting legs and the roof and the verandas and everything that I'm doing. They're not big, but they're just very impressive, very functional, boring and functional.
Next week, when you come up to the 4-year anniversary, technically, is this an emotional time for you?
very for it's Alex and I every New Year's Eve now get a bit twitchy about it. Both of us, when we're watching the news and there's 40-degree days in Western Australia and Perth, and they're talking about major fires in Perth over the next couple of days, and Alex and I both see it, and we both look at each other, and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and it triggers that day. It just brings it back so much more, and it just totally validates what I'm doing. Every time I see something like that, every time I react, I just go, I'm so glad I'm doing it like this. I'm so glad I've made the decision to do it, and everyone, all the people and family and friends who go, why haven't you built it, Webby? Why haven't you built it? And there's a good mate of mine said to me, to some other friend of ours that we both know, he said, this mutual friend of ours said, hasn't Webby gotten into that house yet? And my mate Greg said to him, how long would it take you to build your own house? And Martin went, oh yeah, I guess you're right, but something so different too. So it's added pressure, but post-traumatic growth, and let's educate people and make them more aware.
If you look back in 2019 and I said to you, it would be 2024 before you put a foot back into your house, what would you have said to me?
No, you're mad. No, I'll do it quicker than that, Ross. What do you think I am? Hey? Well, mate, it's it's really made me understand that the older we get, the less we know, and how wonderful we are at it's just such a great opportunity for me to have this new career, and I met so many wonderful people from it. So many people that supported me, the volunteers, the firefighters, the mental health groups, the suppliers, and the whole community that have helped and assisted us in the last 4 years. It's been just astounding. And in fact, if the way I was going 4 years ago when you and I were talking, it would have been very boring 4 years. 4 years.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
Incredible.
I don't need this much excitement again, though. This is, and as I say to people, I love doing this. I'd hate to be building for anyone else. I'm so conscious of but that's me personally, and it's it's a very interesting turnaround 4 years later. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I've taken a lot of pressure off myself justifying it to people, because people just don't get it, or they do get it. It's like my mate Greg said to our mutual mate, how long would it take you to build your own house? And one's so different and so challenging. So it's it's very very great education. Never want to go through it. I don't need an education like that, and I never want to have to prove that I've built a fireproof house or a fire resilient house. I hope I never have to prove it. Yeah. So, but it will come again, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Mate, thanks for taking the time to ask for that story.